The smoke was still rising from the burned wagons. When Jake Morrison found her, the Apache raid had happened 3 days earlier. A swift and brutal attack on a settler wagon train that had been trying to cross Apache territory without proper respect for the dangers involved. By the time Jake had arrived on the scene, drawn by the smoke visible from his ranch 15 miles away, there was nothing left but charred wood, scattered belongings, and the terrible silence that follows violence. Jake had seen the aftermath of raids before. As a man who had chosen to build his life on the edges of civilization, he understood that the frontier was a place where different worlds collided, often with tragic results. He had learned not to judge too quickly, having witnessed cruelty and kindness on all sides of the conflicts that scarred this beautiful but dangerous land. What he hadn't expected to find, hidden in a small grove of cottonwood trees about a quarter-mile from the main attack site, was a child. She was Apache, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with long black hair matted with dust and tears, wearing traditional clothing that was torn and stained. She sat perfectly still against the base of a large tree, her dark eyes wide with shock and fear, watching Jake's approach with the alertness of a wild animal ready to flee or fight. Jake stopped walking when he was still 20 feet away, recognizing the signs of extreme trauma in the child's rigid posture and rapid breathing. He had seen that same look in the eyes of soldiers after particularly brutal battles, the expression of someone whose world had been shattered so completely that they no longer knew what was real or safe. For a long moment, Jake and the girl simply looked at each other across the space that separated them. Jake could see that she was injured. There was dried blood on her left arm and a swelling around her right eye that suggested she had been struck or had fallen hard. More concerning was the way she held herself, as if moving might bring more pain or danger. Jake had learned enough Apache customs during his years on the frontier to understand that approaching her directly might be seen as threatening. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the ground, making himself appear smaller and less intimidating while demonstrating that he had no intention of moving quickly or aggressively. "Easy, little one," Jake said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he used with frightened horses. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't respond, but Jake hadn't expected her to. He could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she was assessing him and his intentions with the careful attention of someone whose survival depended on reading people accurately. Jake was a man who understood patience. At 45, he had spent the last decade building his ranch in this remote corner of New Mexico territory, learning to work with the land rather than against it, developing relationships with both his Mexican neighbors and the Apache bands that moved through the area. He had earned a reputation as someone who could be trusted to keep his word and respect boundaries, a reputation that had kept him safe when other settlers had faced conflicts. But looking at this traumatized child, Jake felt a stirring of protective instinct that went beyond mere neighborly concern. Whatever had happened during the raid, this little girl had been left behind, possibly lost in the chaos, possibly hidden by family members who didn't survive to reclaim her, possibly forgotten. In the confusion that followed violence, Jake reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of jerky and his water canteen. He set both items on the ground halfway between himself and the girl, then retreated to his original position. "You must be hungry and thirsty," Jake said gently. "This is for you if you want it." The girl's eyes fixed on the water canteen with an intensity that told Jake she was indeed desperately thirsty. But she made no move toward the offering, clearly torn between need and the fear that accepting help might lead to capture or worse. Jake settled back against a tree of his own and began speaking in the conversational tone of someone talking to a trusted friend. He told the girl about his ranch, about his horses and cattle, about the family of roadrunners that nested near his front porch every spring. He spoke about the weather, about the changing seasons, about anything that might help her understand that he posed no threat. As Jake talked, he noticed the girl gradually relaxing slightly. Her breathing became less rapid, her posture less rigid. Most importantly, she began to edge slowly toward the water and food he had offered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who expected to need to run at any moment. When she finally reached for the water canteen, Jake continued talking as if nothing had changed, not wanting to startle her with sudden attention to her actions. He watched peripherally as she drank deeply, then cautiously tried the jerky. The desperate way she ate told him that she hadn't had food or water in some time. "That's better," Jake said softly when she had finished eating. "You'll feel stronger." Now, for the first time, the girl looked directly at Jake instead of watching him cautiously from the corner of her eye. He could see questions in her expression. Who was he? What did he want? What would happen to her now? Jake understood that whatever came next would require extraordinary care. This child had obviously been through something traumatic, and her presence here meant that she was completely alone in a world that could be hostile to Apache children, especially those found near the site of a raid. But Jake also understood something else, something that went deeper than practical concerns about what to do with a lost child. Looking into her frightened but brave face, he felt a connection that transcended cultural differences and the complexities of frontier politics. He saw a child in need, and every instinct he possessed told him to help her. "Sweetheart," Jake said gently, "I don't know what happened to your family, and I don't know how you ended up here, but I do know that you're not safe sitting alone in these trees. It's going to get cold tonight, and there are animals that might hurt you." The girl continued to watch him with that careful intensity, obviously understanding more English than she could speak. Jake made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of trying to explain his intentions or asking questions about her circumstances, he simply did what felt right in that moment. Jake stood slowly, walked the few steps that separated them, and held out his hand to the frightened child. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from or what had happened to her family. He didn't make promises about what would happen next or try to reassure her with words she might not understand. He just held out his hand and waited, letting her decide whether to trust him for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The girl looked at Jake's outstretched hand. He could see her weighing her options, trying to decide whether accepting help from this stranger was worth the risk it might represent. Then, with the courage that only children can summon in desperate circumstances, she placed her small hand in his larger one. Jake felt something shift in his chest as her fingers closed around his. It wasn't just the responsibility of caring for a vulnerable child, though that was certainly part of it. It was the recognition that sometimes the most important moments in life come without warning or preparation, demanding that we choose between safety and compassion, between self-interest and the simple recognition of shared humanity. "Come on, little one," Jake said softly, helping her to her feet. "Let's get you somewhere safe and warm. We'll figure out everything else as we go." As they walked together toward Jake's horse, the girl moving with the careful steps of someone who was injured but determined not to show weakness, Jake found himself thinking about the choices that had led him to this moment. He had chosen to live on the frontier because he valued independence and solitude. He had chosen to build his ranch in this particular location because he appreciated the stark beauty of the desert and the freedom that came with distance from civilization. But holding this traumatized child's hand as they walked toward his horse, Jake realized that some choices choose us rather than the other way around. He hadn't set out that morning looking for someone to rescue or a reason to complicate his carefully ordered life, but faced with a child in desperate need, there had really been no choice at all. As he lifted the girl onto his horse and swung up behind her, Jake felt her small body relax slightly against his chest. She was still alert and wary, but some of the rigid tension had left her posture, as if his willingness to help without asking questions had convinced her that she might actually be safe. "We're going home now," Jake said quietly as they began the ride back to his ranch. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone anymore." The girl didn't respond, but Jake felt her grip tighten slightly on the saddle horn, as if she was holding on to more than just the horse, as if she was holding on to the first hope she had felt since her world had been destroyed 3 days earlier. As they rode across the desert toward the ranch that would become her new home, neither Jake nor the girl could have imagined how completely that moment of extended trust would transform both their lives. But sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest gestures. with someone willing to hold out their hand and wait for another person to find the courage to take it. What a powerful moment of pure compassion. Jake's simple act of extending his hand without questions or conditions shows us that sometimes the most profound healing begins with the smallest gesture of trust. If you're moved by this story of wordless kindness and immediate compassion, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss how this beautiful bond develops. Now, let's return to our story and see how Jake and this brave little girl will build a new life together. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, Jake and the Apache girl developed a relationship built on patience, respect, and the gradual understanding that safety could exist without surrendering one's essential self. Jake's ranch house, which had been a bachelor's refuge for over a decade, slowly transformed into a space that accommodated the needs of a traumatized child learning to trust again. Jake never pushed the girl to tell him her name or share details about what had happened to her family. Instead, he focused on meeting her immediate needs, medical care for her injuries, nutritious food to restore her strength, and the kind of consistent, non-threatening presence that could help her nervous system begin to calm down. Dr. Sarah Mendoza, the only physician within 50 miles who had experience treating Apache patients, made the journey to Jake's ranch to examine the girl. Dr. Mendoza was a Mexican-American woman whose own mixed heritage had given her insights into the challenges faced by people caught between different cultures. She's been through severe trauma. Dr. Mendoza told Jake after her examination, the physical injuries are healing well, but the emotional wounds, those will take much longer to address. What do you recommend? Jake asked, watching through the window as the girl sat motionless on his front porch, alert to every sound and movement around her. What you're already doing, Dr. Mendoza replied. Give her consistency, safety, and time. Don't rush her to talk or to trust. Let her set the pace for healing. Jake took this advice to heart, establishing routines that gave the girl predictability without feeling like imprisonment. Each morning, he would knock gently on her door and wait for permission before entering. He would explain his plans for the day and invite her to join him if she felt comfortable, but never pressure her to participate. I'm going to check on the horses this morning, Jake would say, speaking to her as he would to any intelligent person whose opinion he valued. You're welcome to come with me if you'd like, or you can stay here and rest. Maria will be here soon to prepare breakfast. Maria Vasquez, Jake's housekeeper, had proven to be an unexpected blessing in helping the girl adjust. As someone who spoke both Spanish and some Apache, Maria could communicate with the child in ways that transcended the language barrier. More importantly, Maria's own experience as a woman raising children in a harsh environment had given her an intuitive understanding of what the girl needed. She watches everything, Maria observed one afternoon as they prepared dinner while the girl sat nearby, apparently reading, but actually monitoring every aspect of their interaction. She's learning how people behave when they think no one is watching. She's deciding whether we can be trusted. Jake nodded, understanding that he was being evaluated constantly. What do you think she's concluded so far? Maria smiled as she watched the girl carefully turn a page in the book Jake had given her. I think she's beginning to believe that not all adults are dangerous, but she's still waiting for us to prove who we really are. The breakthrough came, as it often does with traumatized children, through an unexpected moment of shared vulnerability. Jake was in the barn treating a wound on one of his horses when he heard a commotion in the yard. The sound of his dog barking frantically and what sounded like someone crying out in distress. Jake rushed outside to find his dog cornering a rattlesnake that had emerged from the woodpile near the house. But between the dog and the snake stood the Apache girl, speaking urgently in her native language while making gestures that seemed designed to calm both animals. Easy, Rex, Jake called to his dog, while simultaneously grabbing a long-handled hoe to deal with the snake. Step back, sweetheart, he said to the girl, not wanting her to get caught between the agitated animals. But instead of stepping back, the girl continued her soft, rhythmic speaking in Apache, and to Jake's amazement, both the dog and the snake seemed to respond to her voice. Rex stopped barking and backed away slightly, while the rattlesnake lowered its head and began to retreat toward the brush. Within moments, the dangerous situation had been diffused without violence, and Jake found himself staring at the girl with new understanding of her capabilities. "That was remarkable," Jake said softly, kneeling down to the girl's level. "How did you know how to do that?" For the first time since he had found her, the girl spoke in English, her voice barely above a whisper but clear and deliberate. "Grandmother taught me. She said all creatures speak if you know how to listen." Jake felt tears prick his eyes at the simple statement, understanding that the girl had just shared something precious with him. Not just her voice, but a memory of someone she had loved and lost. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Jake said gently. "I would have liked to meet her." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she continued to speak. She said some people have gift for understanding animals. She said it is responsibility to use gift to help, not hurt. "You definitely have that gift," Jake agreed. "And you used it to keep all of us safe just now. Thank you." From that day forward, the girl began to speak more regularly, though she remained selective about when and what she chose to share. Jake learned that her Apache name was Aiyana, which meant eternal blossom, and that she had been traveling with her grandmother and uncle when the raid occurred. "I was gathering medicine plants with grandmother when the fighting started," Aiyana told Jake one evening as they sat together on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant colors. "She told me to hide in the trees and not come out until everything was quiet. I waited for 3 days, but no one came back." Jake felt his heart break at the simple recounting of such devastating loss. "Aiyana, I'm so sorry about your grandmother and uncle. They must have loved you very much to want to keep you safe." Aiyana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Grandmother said if something bad happened, I should find good people and let them help me. She said good people exist in all colors and all places. Your grandmother was very wise," Jake said softly, "and I hope she would approve of you staying here with Maria and me." Aiyana looked at Jake with those serious dark eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "You are good people. Grandmother would say you have kind spirits." But she hesitated, clearly struggling with something. "But what, sweetheart? But I don't know if I can stay forever. I don't know if I belong in your world." Jake understood that Aiyana was grappling with questions of identity and belonging that would have challenged adults, let alone a child who had lost everything familiar. "Aiyana, can I tell you something that might help?" She nodded, giving him her complete attention. "I don't think belonging is about looking the same or coming from the same place," Jake said carefully. "I think belonging is about caring for each other, helping each other, and choosing to be family even when we're different." Aiyana considered this seriously. "So I could be Apache and also be your family. You could be exactly who you are and still belong here," Jake confirmed. "In fact, being exactly who you are is what makes you special. I wouldn't want you to be anyone different." For the first time since he had known her, Aiyana smiled, a real, genuine expression of happiness that transformed her entire face. "I would like to stay and be your family, Jake, if you want me." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion at her formal acceptance of their relationship. "Aiyana, I can't think of anything I would want more than to have you as my daughter. You've brought light to a house that was dark, purpose to days that were empty, and joy to a heart that had forgotten how to be happy." As autumn turned to winter, their relationship continued to deepen and evolve. Aiyana proved to be an eager student, learning to read and write English while teaching Jake words and concepts in Apache. She shared her grandmother's knowledge of desert plants and animal behavior while Jake taught her about ranching, mathematics, and the broader world beyond their desert home. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to be a family, not the traditional family that either of them had originally known, but something new and unique that honored both their backgrounds while creating space for growth and change. "You know," Jake said one evening as they worked together to prepare dinner while Maria visited her sister in town, "I used to think that family was just the people you were born to. But you've taught me that family is actually the people who choose to love and take care of each other." Aiyana looked up from the vegetables she was cutting with the careful precision Jake had taught her. Grandmother used to say that the strongest families are chosen families because they're built on love instead of just blood. Your grandmother said a lot of wise things. Jake observed. She did. Aiyana agreed. But I think you and Maria say wise things too. I'm learning wisdom from all my families. The one I was born to and the one I chose. As Jake watched his daughter work with quiet competence and growing confidence, he marveled at the journey that had brought them together. He had held out his hand to a frightened child without knowing anything about her, except that she needed help. In return, she had placed her trust in him and, in doing so, had given him the greatest gift he had ever received, the opportunity to love and be loved unconditionally. Neither of them had asked for the circumstances that had brought them together, but both of them had found the courage to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss and trauma. They had proven that sometimes the most profound connections begin not with words or explanations, but with the simple willingness to extend, trust, and accept help. A year after Jake Morrison first extended his hand to a traumatized Apache girl, hiding in the cottonwoods, their lives had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Aiyana, now 10 years old, had blossomed into a confident, articulate child who moved seamlessly between her Apache heritage and her new life on the ranch, serving as a bridge between worlds that had previously existed in mutual suspicion and fear. But their peaceful existence was about to face its greatest test when word of their unusual family arrangement reached the territorial authorities, who decided that an Apache child living with a white rancher represented exactly the kind of irregular situation that required official intervention. The trouble arrived on a crisp February morning in the form of Agent William Blackwood and Sheriff Tom Bradley, both men who viewed their mission as a simple matter of enforcing proper racial boundaries and federal Indian policy. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Blackwood announced as he dismounted from his horse, "I'm here on official business regarding the Apache child you've been harboring on your property." Jake, who had been expecting this confrontation since the day he had first taken Aiyana home, stepped out onto his front porch with the calm demeanor of a man who had spent considerable time preparing for this moment. "Agent Blackwood," Jake replied evenly, "Aiyana is my legally adopted daughter, not a harbored fugitive. If you have questions about her welfare, I'm happy to address them." Blackwood consulted his official documents with the authority of a man who had never encountered a regulation he didn't love. "Mr. Morrison, this adoption was never approved by federal authorities. Apache children are wards of the government and must be placed in appropriate educational facilities where they can receive proper instruction in civilized behavior." "And what," Jake asked quietly, "makes you think Aiyana isn't receiving proper instruction here?" Before Blackwood could answer, Aiyana herself appeared in the doorway. Having obviously heard the conversation, at 10 years old, she had grown into a poised young lady who carried herself with quiet dignity despite her youth. She wore a simple dress that Maria had made for her, and her long black hair was neatly braided with ribbons that reflected both her Apache heritage and her adaptation to ranch life. "Papa," Aiyana said, using the name that had become natural over the months they had lived together. "Who are these men?" The simple question, asked in perfect English with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and protected, seemed to catch both officials off guard. They had clearly expected to find a savage child in need of rescue, not a well-dressed, articulate young lady who spoke with the assurance of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his expression slightly uncomfortable. "Jake, nobody's questioning that you've taken good care of the girl. But Agent Blackwood here has federal authority in matters involving Indian children. We need to follow proper procedures." Jake looked at the two men, seeing in their faces the same mixture of prejudice and bureaucratic inflexibility that had characterized so many of the conflicts he had witnessed on the frontier. But he also saw something else, uncertainty, as if Aiyana's obvious well-being had complicated their simple narrative of rescue and civilizing mission. "Gentlemen," Jake said calmly, "before you make any decisions about Aiyana's future, I think you should understand what you're proposing to disrupt." Over the next hour, Jake led the officials on a tour of the ranch, demonstrating Aiyana's integration into every aspect of their life together. They saw her work with the horses, using skills that combined Apache horse whispering traditions with modern ranching techniques. They watched her help Maria with cooking, seamlessly moving between English, Spanish, and Apache as the conversation required. Most impressive of all was Aiyana's demonstration of her academic progress. She read aloud from advanced texts, solved mathematical problems that would have challenged much older students, and displayed a knowledge of geography, history, and natural sciences that reflected Jake's commitment to her education. As you can see, Jake said as they returned to the house, Aiyana is thriving in every measurable way. She's healthy, happy, well-educated, and deeply loved. What possible benefit would there be in removing her from this environment? Agent Blackwood, clearly frustrated by the failure of his preconceptions, made one last attempt to assert his authority. Mr. Morrison, regardless of the child's apparent progress, federal policy is clear. Indian children must be educated in approved facilities where they can be properly assimilated into American society. It was Aiyana who provided the response that would define not just this confrontation, but her understanding of her own identity and place in the world. Mr. Blackwood, she said with the quiet dignity that had become her trademark, I am already part of American society. I speak English, I can read and write. I understand mathematics and science, but I also speak Apache. I know the stories of my people, and I understand that my heritage is a gift, not a burden to be erased. She paused, looking directly into Blackwood's eyes with a confidence that seemed to unnerve him. My father has taught me that being civilized means treating others with respect, caring for those who need help, and using your knowledge to make the world better. If that's not what your schools teach, then maybe they're the ones who need better education. The simple truth and dignity of Aiyana's response seemed to stun both officials into silence. Here was a 10-year-old child demonstrating more wisdom and maturity than the adults, who were supposedly qualified to determine her best interests. Sheriff Bradley, who had known Jake for years and had witnessed the transformation in both man and child over the past year, finally spoke up. Agent Blackwood, it seems to me that this girl is getting exactly the kind of education and upbringing that our policies are supposed to provide. Maybe we should focus on situations where children actually need our help. But Blackwood was not easily deterred from his bureaucratic mission. Sheriff, you don't understand the larger implications. If we allow this kind of irregular arrangement, it undermines the entire federal Indian policy framework. And if we break up a loving family that's harming no one and helping everyone involved, Jake interjected quietly, we undermine something far more important than policy frameworks. We undermine basic human decency. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the unexpected arrival of Dr. Sarah Mendoza, who had been making her regular monthly visit to check on Aiyana's continued recovery and development. Gentlemen, Dr. Mendoza said as she dismounted from her horse, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Agent Blackwood turned to her with obvious relief, apparently assuming that a medical professional would support his position. Dr. Mendoza, I'm Agent Blackwood with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Perhaps you can provide some professional perspective on this child's need for proper institutional care. Dr. Mendoza looked at Aiyana, then at Jake, then back at the agent with the expression of someone who had just heard something incredibly foolish. Agent Blackwood, Dr. Mendoza said carefully, I've been monitoring Aiyana's development for over a year now, and I can state categorically that she represents one of the most successful examples of trauma recovery and healthy development I've ever witnessed in my medical practice. She pulled out a folder of notes and medical records. This child arrived here severely traumatized, malnourished, and injured under Mr. Morrison's care. She has not only recovered completely, but has thrived in ways that exceed normal developmental expectations. Her intellectual, emotional, and social progress has been remarkable. Blackwood's face reddened with frustration. Dr. Mendoza, surely you recognized that proper institutional care would be more appropriate than this irregular domestic arrangement. Double quotes. Dr. Mendoza's expression hardened. Agent Blackwood, I've worked with children from government Indian schools, and I can tell you that the outcomes there are often tragic. Children separated from everything familiar, punished for speaking their native languages, stripped of their cultural identity. That's not education, it's cultural destruction. She gestured toward Aiyana, who was listening to the adult conversation, with the serious attention of someone whose future was being decided. This child has achieved something that your institutions almost never accomplish. She has integrated successfully into a new culture, while maintaining pride in her original heritage. She's bilingual, bicultural, and confident in both worlds. That's not a problem to be solved, it's a success to be celebrated. Sheriff Bradley nodded in agreement. Dr. Mendoza is right, Agent Blackwood. This family isn't broken, it's just different, and different doesn't always mean wrong. Faced with professional medical testimony, local law enforcement support, and the obvious evidence of Aiyana's well-being, Agent Blackwood was forced to retreat from his hardline position. "Very well," he said with obvious reluctance. "I'll note in my report that the child appears to be receiving adequate care, but this arrangement will continue to be monitored, and any problems will result in immediate intervention." As the officials departed, Jake felt Aiyana slip her hand into his, the same gesture of trust that had begun their relationship. A year earlier, but now reinforced by months of shared experiences and deepening love. "Papa," Aiyana said quietly, "were you scared they would take me away?" Jake knelt down to her level, wanting her to see the truth in his eyes. "A little scared," he admitted honestly, "but also confident that our family is strong enough to face any challenge. You belong here, Aiyana, not because the government says so, but because we chose each other, and will keep choosing each other," Aiyana asked, "every day for the rest of our lives." Jake promised. 5 years later, as Jake watched 15-year-old Aiyana graduate from the territorial teacher's college with the highest honors in her class, he marveled at the journey that had brought them both to this moment of triumph. Aiyana had become everything that Dr. Mendoza had predicted. A confident young woman who moved easily between cultures, who used her unique background to help others, and who had never forgotten the importance of extending a helping hand to those in need. "Papa," Aiyana said as they stood together after the graduation ceremony, "do you remember what you told me the day those men came to take me away? About choosing each other every day." "I remember," Jake replied, his heart swelling with pride, as he watched his daughter prepare to begin her career as a teacher specializing in bicultural education. "I want you to know that I would choose you again every single day," Aiyana said softly. "You didn't just save my life when you held out your hand that day. You gave me a future, a family, and the knowledge that love doesn't depend on looking the same or coming from the same place." Jake felt tears of joy stream down his weathered cheeks as he embraced the remarkable young woman his frightened little girl had become. "Aiyana, you gave me just as much. You taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about the willingness to reach out when someone needs help and to hold on when life gets difficult." As they walked together toward the celebration that their extended family, Maria, Dr. Mendoza, and dozens of friends from both the Apache and Anglo communities, had organized in Aiyana's honor, Jake reflected on the simple gesture that had changed both their lives forever. He had held out his hand to a terrified child without asking her name or demanding explanations about her circumstances. In return, she had placed her trust in him and, in doing so, had given him the greatest gift he had ever received, the opportunity to love and be loved unconditionally. They had proven that sometimes the most profound connections begin not with words or questions, but with the simple willingness to offer help and accept trust. Jake had held out his hand, Aiyana had taken it, and together they had built something beautiful, a family that transcended all the boundaries that society had tried to place between them. In the end, it hadn't mattered that she was Apache and he was Anglo, that she was a child and he was an adult, that they came from different worlds with different traditions. What mattered was that when one of them needed help, the other had been willing to extend a hand, and when that hand was offered, both of them had been brave enough to hold on tight and never let go. Their love story was proof that sometimes the most important question isn't "what's your name?" or "where do you come from?" Sometimes the most important question is "do you need help?" And sometimes the most profound answer is simply reaching out your hand and waiting for someone to take it. What an absolutely beautiful conclusion. Jake and Aiyana's story proves that love doesn't need words or explanations. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to extend their hand and someone brave enough to take it. Their bond has grown into something truly extraordinary. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of wordless compassion and chosen family. If this tale of simple kindness growing into unbreakable love touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who believes in the power of reaching out when someone needs help. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment when someone extended their hand without questions or conditions? What does it mean to you to offer help without expecting anything in return? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to be the first to see our next Western tale. Remember, sometimes the most profound connections begin not with words, but with the simple courage to reach out when someone needs you most. Until next time, may you always have the compassion to extend your hand and the courage to take someone else's when you need it.